Today, I have a very special guest for you and for me because I used to work for this company. Nandan Nilekani, co-founder and the non-exec chair of the board of Infosys, a $14 billion revenue company with a market cap of around 90 billion, as well as the world's top three most respected company. Nandan was the CEO from 2002 to 2011, when Infosys grew from 500 million to 6 billion in revenue. So we are living in chaotic times, Nandan, right? I mean, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, right? And crisis amplify weaknesses in system. And chaos and changes is happening at all levels of our life. Geopolitics and trade, economy and financial system, health and wellness, work and education, social and connections, and individual rights, just within the last 18 months. But it is also brewing the perfect environment where everything is up for change. And therefore allowing, I think, faster change and the kind of systemic change that a lot of change makers would love to see to make happen. And I think you're one of those.
Thank you, Josephine, and it's really a great question because, as you rightly said, the pandemic has accelerated everything and changed everything. Whether it's working from home, whether it is digital acceleration, whether it's supply chain redesign, everything is up for grabs. And I think for people like us, you and me, who embrace change, it's actually a great time because when things are changing like this is also when the maximum opportunities come. And these are the opportunities that you have to find out. You have to do something with it, maybe create enterprises, scale up the enterprises. But the important thing, Josephine, is our ability to distinguish signal from noise. There's a lot of noise out there and you can get distracted. It's your ability to cut through the noise and get to the root of what needs to be done. That's going to be a very important skill in the coming years.
So talk a bit more about how to spot the signals and also focusing on what do you see is the key shift and change that is happening at the global level that is relevant because you always have a global perspective.
Yeah, well, I think learning to distinguish the signal from the noise is also it's a skill that one has to acquire. And best thing is to go back to first principles about business, about the world, about human beings, and then sort of try to figure it out. It's like you got to really work on this. But I think the number of things. One is, of course, COVID has changed everything. We have seen the impact on our lives. We have all learned how to manage on our own, be at home, do everything. We haven't traveled. I think Australia is, you're all there.
Lockdown. We're still in lockdown. And then
you're in a fortress or something like that. So I think that's one thing. And then, of course, the nature of work, the hybrid work combination. Tomorrow, when everybody opens up, they won't open up fully. And people have tasted the notion of working from home, and that's going to continue. So we'll have hybrid work. Another important thing is the importance of digital has come out very strongly because we have seen that companies and individuals who are digitally equipped have done better in the pandemic than those who are not. And therefore, digital has become very important. And the acceleration of various digital trends, like the movement to the cloud, big data, AI, consumerization, user experience, modernization, ecosystems, all platform thinking, all that has accelerated. And I think we are seeing also I think, as you rightly said, the geopolitics, the whole issue of US, China, even Australia, and new partnerships are getting forged. The era of globalization was completely, anybody could go anywhere. That era is coming to a close, and we are seeing more, sort of breaking it up into different groups. And even the supply chains are now becoming affected because supply chains are becoming redesigned to be not just in time, but just in case. So I think all this is happening at the same time, Josephine, but it's a fantastic time to be doing things.
Well, that's why I say for ChangeMaker like you, it's like a fertile playground, from the perspective. So you touch on two things that we want to dig deeper into. The data world, because we talk about data. And I've watched some of your video. How you articulated how data is being used differently in different countries is really interesting. Could you just talk us through that?
Well, I think, we talk about three things in the world which we're dealing with, right? One is, of course, climate change and the acceleration of the need to go to a more sustainable future. And that everybody understands is happening. The second thing clearly has been the pandemic and dealing with these kind of mega events. But the third thing is what happens to data, because the consequence or byproduct of a digital economy is humongous amounts of data is generated. And that data can be used in a positive way or in a negative way, in the sense that the data can be used for surveillance, which is not a great thing in some possible situations. Or data can be used to sell to you, advertising and so on. But if the model that we in India have called the data empowerment and protection architecture is a model where the data is with the person who generates it. So if I have a digital footprint on doing various activities, I have access to my own data, and then I can put it to work for me for getting some benefit. It could be getting a loan or getting better healthcare or better education or a better job. And this fundamentally inverting data into the hands of people, empowering people with their own data, democratizing data is, we think, a very important requirement. And I believe many countries, including Australia, are looking at how we can create this data empowerment for the future, because that's going to be the biggest challenge that we face. Or how do people get access to their own data?
Yeah, and you were talking about how obviously in India that is happened in a different way, and how obviously for China it's happening different, and how US has always been at the forefront because they move so fast. It's happening in a different way, as well as Europe, right? Can you just elaborate how that is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There are four models that we have seen. The US model has been about letting, in the last 20 years, it's been really letting private companies take the leadership on the internet. But now some of the consequences of that are being understood. Yesterday we heard about this whistleblower and so on. And therefore, in the US, I think there is some amount of rethink on what should be the exact role of companies. How do you make them more competitive and reduce any possible monopoly situations and so on. Also, how to deal with free speech, how to deal with polarization, political messaging, fake news, all that.
Yeah.
In the Chinese model, again, they have allowed large companies to come up, but now again you're seeing that China is retracting some of that and is trying to bring these companies back, under their supervision, so to speak. And in fact, they're asking for the data. So there it's all about data, largely with the state. The European model is really how to protect people, and they've come out with far-reaching regulations on data protection, the GDPR, and now that digital markets and so on. And the Indian model is what we call as the inclusive internet, where because people have access to their own data, they can use that to improve their lives. And therefore, we think of this as a data democracy. And we think this applies to all democracies. So I think the model that we have will work very well with the thinking in Australia, the US, Europe, and so on. And I do believe that there is a lot of interest in that, Josephine.
Okay, and we talk also about how, the whole logistic change, and you touch about how the domestic versus globalization, right? So do you still think the world is still flat, Nandan?
So, obviously, we had a period between the time that the Berlin Wall fell down in the early 89, 90, and then a decade later, China became part of the WTO. And then we saw the rise of the internet and the rise of containerizations. We saw that the world was globalizing very rapidly, and that was sort of the world is flat was epitomized by the best-selling book by my friend Thomas Friedman. But in the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen some amount of a reaction to this globalization, because middle classes in the Western countries have felt that they have not benefited from globalization. For some people, the rise of China has been something they think about. So I think we are seeing a period where that kind of globalization that we saw from, say, 1990 to 2014, I think that is over. So obviously the world is still interconnected, it's still globalized, And then, of course, the pandemic made us all retreat into our shells. So I think what's going to emerge out of that is a different model. Of course, there will be globalization. Of course, there's going to be trade. Of course, there's going to be migration of people. And of course, there's going to be movement of capital. But it'll be in a different form. Maybe local supply chains, maybe more delivered remotely using remote workers. So I think the shape of this new globalization is going to be different.
Okay, so given that context of data and then how, this globalization is changed, and we are addressing obviously CEO and entrepreneurs who are looking at growing a global company that has impact and difference at scale. How do you think in this background, how has scale and growth changed now compared to how, when you were growing Infosys and Globalization, it has happened? How has that changed?
Well, I think you have to think very deeply about how to do it now. And you have to say, how do we globalize or how do we scale up our business in a world which potentially could have multiple, not one single market, but multiple markets which don't necessarily work with each other. We have to see how to work when technology gets fragmented and different kinds of, for a long time, there was just one internet, but now we are seeing much more splinter net, as they call it, where it splinters into multiple versions. But I think scaling is still the same, Josephine. I think it's not doing something and scaling, it's thinking through what works at scale. And whether it was at Infosys or later on, I worked for several years in the government and built the world's largest digital ID platform, 1.3 billion people, called Aadhaar. I always thought about how to design for scale. And so I think designing for scale, keeping your design flexible, keeping optionality in your design, being able to pivot very quickly, agility of design, these things are very important for getting scale right.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about that because there was one of the questions. I'm going to skip ahead. So scale thinking and designing for scale versus, you mentioned in the podcast, execution sequence. What is the difference?
See, the thing is, designing for scale is you obviously have an end game in your mind, saying that this is the kind of business, this is the kind of market share, this is the kind of products and services. So it's an end game. But getting to that end game is a sequence of steps, and the ability to figure out what is the next step. So that ultimately, maybe after 10 steps or 20 steps, you get to the end game. But being able to break down the journey into individual steps, that is the heart of this. And that's what people have to figure out. I mean, you should have both vision as well as executional steps if you really want to accomplish what you set out to do.
So then skill thinking would be like big thinking, and then designing for skill is like understanding the constraint and the capacity in the system itself and understanding where to put effort and resource in.
Yes, also about what is the priorities, in the sense, what do I do first? What do I do second? Don't try to do too many things at the same time, but do them step by step, consolidate each step, then go to the next step. And ultimately, if you do this for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, you're in a very different place.
Okay. Let's talk about then in terms of size, what we say size and scale in terms of design. Okay. So Infosys took 23 years to have 1 billion in revenue. Now a startup can become a unicorn in 2.5 years, according to a report recently, right? So what do you think is going on? I mean, it's like, it's not about raising a few hundred mil. It's not about raising a few double-digit million. It's raising $100+ million and therefore having a $1 billion in valuation instead. Is something wrong with this picture, or is just a change of times?
No, it's a different era. When Infosys began 40 years back, it was a different era. It was before economic reforms in India. It's before this dramatic technology evolution that has happened. It's before the flood of capital that is now going through the world. So we live in a different era with massive amounts of capital, the technology where I can use my credit card, access a cloud, and set up a company. The whole world is my market in some sense if I'm able to deliver it on the cloud. But it also means that there is intense competition. And therefore, if there's intense competition, those guys who move faster, those companies that have momentum, those companies that can scale up rapidly are going to win. And therefore, the model is scale up even though you're not profitable. Infosys was always profitable, and we had to make money, profits, put the profits back and get growth. But today's world is about raising a lot of capital, maybe making losses, but ultimately getting to a size when then you can look at profitability. So I think the thinking is slightly different. And we know now we have billions of dollars coming from VCs, private equity funds, pension funds, global sovereign funds, and so on. So capital is flooding the world.
Yeah.
So this model is changed a bit now.
So it's almost like all the startups are currently chasing valuation and investment versus revenue and profit, right? And in some way, it's like the more money you can raise, the faster you'll be able to scale, because you can put the investment and resources in building those skills and the building block that you're talking about, right?
Yes. It's called growing into your market cap, in the sense what these markets do is they are willing to give you a large market cap, even though you don't have revenue or even if you don't have profits, because they believe that you can get there. And therefore, when somebody gives you $1 billion valuation, you may be a small company, but they believe that you have the right products and services where you can scale up quickly, and soon you have real revenue and real profits which justify the $1 billion market cap. And that's what happened in China and in the US. If you look at companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Netflix and many of these firms, they were loss making in the early days, but then they grew into the market cap. Similarly, in China, people like Tencent and Alibaba grew into the market cap. So the belief is that if you give these guys enough money and if they can execute well, they can grow into the market cap.
Yeah. Does it mean that they actually probably, it's about making sure, I think in the interview you said they need to have a pathway to profitability, right? Is it that you need to make sure that they have a good unit economics model?
Yeah. Yes. And yes, unit economics as soon as possible should be positive. And then finally, the company itself should have positive cash flow. This I was saying more in the context of going public, Josephine. What is happening is many of these startups in the private world were getting money from private markets, and therefore the valuation was what a few people decide. But the day you go public on the stock exchange, whether it's NASDAQ, NYSE, Bombay, Sydney, whatever, then markets are watching you and they expect you to perform. And therefore, when you go public, while you could be loss making, while you go public, you should be clear about saying that in 2 years or 3 years, you will reach profit. So because public markets can be unforgiving sometimes. And if they can't deliver a profitable model, then they can punish you.
Yeah, and there's the expectation that if you're a unicorn, somehow you need to either exit to the public market or you need to find somebody big enough to buy you at that valuation.
Well, there are multiple models. One is, of course, yes, M&A. You can either be the buyer and buy up companies and grow, or you can get purchased and become part of another company. Or you can, or you can, as you said, if you feel confident that you can be independent, you need to go to the public market sooner or later.
Okay, so you have invested in some startup, I think a dozen of them. How do you choose between two startups if they're both trying to solve the same problem? Because you also have you wanted to solve India's specific problem or something like that I saw in one of the articles, right? So the same startup trying to solve the same problem, one has a better product or solution, one has a better founder in terms of his attitude and aptitude and growth mindset. How would you evaluate?
For me, the founding team is super critical. Because you need great founders, people who have vision, tenacity, integrity, people who want to run the long distance marathon. And if at the point they talk to you, if the business model is not fully there, they can easily pivot because they're smart enough. Whereas if you have somebody who may have a better model, but the entrepreneurs are not that high quality, they will not be able to get it going. So for me, quality of the team is number one. And then, of course, you look at the total addressable market, you look at the momentum, you look at the business model and path to profitability, you look at the narrative they have about the world, and that's how you make. But it's fundamentally about selecting people who have it, because they are the people who will make or break a company.
Yeah, okay. And how important is it to take big bets? Because you said something about, at the end of the day, it's about taking some big bets in terms of how the world is going to shape up.
Yeah, you have to have a point of view, right or wrong, about where the world is going. What are going to be the defining thing? Of course, some things you can't predict. I don't think anybody predicted the pandemic. But we know, for example, that sustainability is going to be a big challenge as we deal with climate change. We know that we need, digitally native companies providing customers services, whether it's in store or on the internet. We know that we need great supply chains. We need to, we know that data is going to be there, so we need to consumerize, provide individual consumer experiences and so on. So I think, if you have a point of view of where the world is going, then you can take stock of an individual company and assess whether it's good for scale.
Okay, let's talk about leading people and leadership and leading people through change, because obviously currently there's so many things that change, where startup is also actually leading people and the stakeholder to change. And you are obviously fantastic at doing that, especially people with different point of view and all that. What is your secret sauce? How do you do that?
Well, one is, of course, as I said, I try to separate the signal from the noise. I'm always analyzing and connecting the dots to figure out what is really happening in the world. And that's something I developed, that skill, over the last 4 decades. Second is that I lead not by ordering, but by motivating and inspiring people to aim big, and then giving them the space to execute on that. Then I also look for people who have skills complementary to mine, so that as a team we can work very well. And also about painting a big vision of the future, because people are motivated by vision and aspiration. And and human beings, we need to raise the level of aspiration. So that's something which I think is very important. I've done that obviously at Infosys. I've done that with startups. I've done that in my role in the government. I've done that in my role in the nonprofit space. And it's all about finding great people, motivating them, giving them the chance to lead, giving them a clear vision, and giving them the right inputs as they go on their journey.
Okay, let's talk about the big vision and the B hack, because this is one example I use actually with regards to my startup that I teach, right? I remember in 2000, when I was the first employee in Singapore, and I was presenting the Infosys corporate deck. And I remember the vision was to be the world's most respected company. And I remember when I talk about it, I told myself, okay, how is this going to happen? Because we're like only $200 million company. And recently in 2019, Infosys was ranked the top 3 most respected company. That B hack and that vision has actually realized when all 7 of you has left the company.
Yes. So that's the point. How do you have a long-term vision? And it looks audacious, it looks implausible, it looks difficult. But having that audacious goal is very, very important to motivate people. And I think, companies go through ups and downs, and individuals go through ups and downs. And having that big vision gives you some insulation against adversity. It makes you feel that, fine, we are having a bad day today, but we can still get up and move on. So I think it's very important to have this strategic vision of where you want to go.
But you also said that it need to be big enough so that it unlock the thinking that they have as well, right?
I mean, I think the big change between the time Infosys was founded and today is acceleration. In the sense that during the time that Infosys was a small company, the market was not as competitive as it was today. It was difficult to do business, and therefore nobody could really grow. But today we live in a market that's growing at a blistering pace. And so the acceleration with so many new entrepreneurs, so many opportunities, so much capital, so much technology, that has obviously changed dramatically in this 40 years, which is why today a lot of people say, let's give them the money, let them go all out. They will ultimately grow and become big.
So when you remember when you were going through 1 to 10 mil, 10 to 100 mil, and 100 mil to $1 billion, which is when you were the CEO at that time, which stage was the most challenging?
Actually, the earlier ones, because it was about mindset change.
Okay.
It was getting people to think big. So you see, everything is in the mind. So if the leadership team thinks incremental or small, then the company will be incremental or small. If the leadership team thinks big and motivates others to think big, then so I think the big transformation at Infosys was when we went public in India in 1993, where we had to either become big or we didn't have a play because the competition was going up. And that's when we changed our approach. We brought in strategic thinking, budgeting, HR practices, learning platforms, built a great campus. Infosys campus was built in 1992, the first campus of that type probably in the world. And so I think it's really changing your mind is the most difficult thing is changing your mindset.
And in 1999, why was the aspiration to list in the US and the Nasdaq at that time?
Again, we were a global company, which was our clients were global, and they wanted a sort of they wanted to make sure that we were of the highest quality of corporate governance, transparency, financial disclosure, and so on. And by listing in Western market, we were able to give that comfort to our customers. And therefore, Infosys was the first Indian company to list in Nasdaq in 1999, and now it's on the NYSE.
So when you're growing so fast and when you're so big and growing so fast, it's like agility. How do you still have agility when you're growing so fast? It's almost like the engine is changing while you're flying at full speed ahead. Can elephant really dance, and how do you do that?
I think that's a great question, and a lot of it is making your organization agile, having quick decision making, having your antenna working at all times to see what's changing, quickly rippling those changes through the organization, reducing bureaucracy, getting people to use technology more and paperwork less, making them outward focused. All these are required to make large companies more agile.
Okay. I'll ask you a fun question. If you have two child, obviously your legacy, right, from that perspective, one is Infosys, because obviously you gave birth to and created it. The other one, obviously, is your Aadhaar program, your gift to India per se. Which will be your favorite child?
Well, I can't choose. I think both are extraordinary opportunities that I got in life. Infosys is clearly an iconic company in India and for the world. And Aadhaar has changed the lives of 1 billion people and made access to services. So both have been great. And I feel very lucky and fortunate that I got a chance to do two very different things in one lifetime.
Leadership top down, bottom up, and empowerment of the people. How do you balance that?
Actually, it's both top down and bottom up. You obviously have to lead, you have to define a vision and motivate people. But it's also bottom up because you can't do everything, and therefore you have to delegate to people after assessing their strengths and weaknesses, and then give them coaching and help them move forward. So it's both top down and bottom up. It's both strategy and execution. It's both long term and short term. So it has many dimensions, and the best leaders I know have combined these things: the ability to think at scale and get into details, the ability to think 5 years ahead and tomorrow, the ability to have grand strategy and detailed execution. So all this is required to be successful in today's world.
I have to say that Infosys has probably spoiled me, I think, because I think in my 20s when I was with you guys, everything was always so progressive, but never excessive. And all the things and the values and things that we did at that time, now the Western world, I'm here and they're all talking about the same thing. And I'm like, haven't we already done that? Isn't this already, a normal thing? And apparently,
sometimes we are ahead of our time. I mean, I don't know if you know this, Josephine, but last in 2020, we became carbon neutral, yes. 30 years ahead of Paris. So we began our sustainability thing 10 years back.
I know.
And today we run. So we're always a little ahead of our time.
I know. That's why I find it strange, because I said I'm spoiled by Infosys because I thought that's just all normal. Look at leadership. I've always been impressed with the leadership that we have, obviously, given the experience.
Yeah, Infosys Leadership Institute was set up 20 years back.
Yeah. So. But I think it's also, and I'm saying that as from a personal experience to vouch for my experience, just as a 20-year-old working with you guys directly, I've never feel so personally empowered at such a young age, so junior. to make those decisions while we were growing at a company.
Great. I'm glad you had a fantastic experience in Infosys, and I'm delighted that you're an ambassador for Infosys around the world.
Okay, balance of strategy and execution. Is it 50-50 or 80-20?
I would say it's 20 strategy, 80 execution, but the 20 strategy has to be extremely thoughtful, because if you choose the wrong road, you can have great execution, but you'll end up in the wrong destination.
Yeah, the 3-degree difference that change a completely different pathway, isn't it? Okay, rank them in terms of how you invest. Economic empowerment, health and wellness, education, inequality.
Well, I believe, I think they are related in the sense, if we can educate everybody and give them good health and healthcare and create an opportunity economy where they can rise, then inequality will also get addressed. And a lot of my work is actually about how to make opportunity for all, how to get millions of people to get access, because then hopefully they will all improve their lives. And with Aadhaar, for example, 1 billion people are able to use their digital identity and get a bank account, travel in a train, get a job. So that's really scale. Like each person, it's a small thing, but when you add it on 1 million people, it's a needle moving kind of change.
Yeah, but it's also a country that you can do a lot of impact and change from the perspective, and that's probably what you're doing.
Yes.
So
Great.
thank you, Nandan, for the time.
Thank you, Josephine, and all the best for your Sophos. And I met you at Frankfurt or Stuttgart?
That's what I was going to say. The last time I see you, it has to be in Stuttgart.